Hello, everyone. I'm going to take a moment to retweet this.
Oh, yes. Oh, not on my phone.
Yeah, but I'm going to give everyone a few moments to log in while we do our kind of opening spiel, which is good evening, welcome. If you are tuning in for the first time, this is the Maison Rouge Monday night weekly live broadcast, which has sort of shifted to every other every other week. I am one of your hosts, Lucy Sweetkill, as well as Dynasty we're both on for the first time in a little bit. A little bit about who we are. LMDR is dedicated to expanding the BDSM experience by discussing, educating, and informing our audiences about the intersections of kink, wellness, sexuality, spirituality, and social activism. We aim to create a safe space for discussing these topics, as well as providing an avenue for our guests to share their stories and experiences. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. Tonight, we're kind of doing something a little different. So I'm going to let Miss Dia kind of intro us into that.
I'm just replying to everybody in the comments, and I'll probably be manning comments as we move along. And also just a reminder that if you have questions, please hold them until the very end. So tonight we thought that it would be fun to tell you guys our story from the Baby Domme dungeon days. And Lucy and I met there at the dungeon. It's actually technically called a fetish play space, I believe.
Yeah.
And so we got our training, our initiation, like our feet wet, our hands dirty, everything together. And it's a wonderful story. And if we've never really been able to like come together and tell it in its entirety, you've probably heard bits and pieces of it through our different interviews and stuff. So we thought it'd be nice to just give you a little bit of our origins when it comes to being pro-doms.
Yeah. And so I think both of us have definitely talked about our journey of how, our origin story, but we really wanted to focus on like the start of our Baby Domme stories. So I think we both looked up when we had first started too. So I was November of 2010 was my I don't know the exact date itself, but that was the month.
I happen to have all the paperwork. I keep the exquisite files.
Yeah.
And it was the 20th of October of 2008. Yep. So almost like a month and 2 years, I guess, before you started.
Yeah, so about 2, which I think was correct. I remember when I got brought in specifically, I knew that I would be training with yourself, the headmistress, and one other dom who had been there for about, I think, the same amount of time you had, right?
Okay. Do you mean Jung?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just about. It's funny because like this is how all of my really solid, long-lasting friendships begin. And it's when the headmistress told me, I hired this new girl. She's like a dragon lady. And my brain was like, what? No, I'm a dragon lady, and there was this like sense of like there can only be one, because I was still stuck in the patriarchal consciousness back then. And so when I first met Lucy, I already had this like sense of like
And we'll totally get into that.
Yes.
But I want to know, when you first started, do you remember who was supposed to train you? Were you only trained by the headmistress, or was it the same situation I had where I had you two and the headmistress, but really it was like you?
Yeah. So this was before, when I came in, it was before the headmistress started to kind of like lose touch a little. So it was mostly her, and it was very like technical. Like she would, show me how to do physical things. But she of course had her own style of like banter and domination that didn't really, wasn't my style. So I was lacking in the whole like psychological backstory or psychological like philosophy of like why you do this.
So it was only just her.
It was only just her.
Got it. Yeah, because I think there was I feel like there were a lot of shifts, right? Like even within like from when you started to then me, there were a lot of like shifts, and I think after me, and I don't know, so I guess you can tell me best, but I feel like about a year into when I started, that's when I started to see like all these cracks in not only her, but how things were being run.
Yeah. And I think that, this is really interesting, because I feel like as you came in and you and I and John kind of like solidified this sense of seniority there.
Yeah.
It was almost like permission for headmistress to start falling apart.
Huh.
Like
so when she was training you in those 2 years, she was pretty on point for you.
From what I could tell, she was definitely more on point than I didn't see, I saw mostly mania. I didn't see as much absence.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
As we psychoanalyze our former headmistress.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like, it's such an interesting experience, right? Like, because, I'm really curious, because we talked about it a little, but I am really curious how she was the 2 years when you started and how she was, because like within that year of when I started, I was like, okay, like there were definitely, and I wasn't even full time the first year.
I honestly think that you are extremely like keen and acutely aware of when somebody, like when things don't look right, when there's like red flags and things, like you can see that kind of stuff. And personally, me, I'm more of like a, oh, well, like whatever. I'm not as keen, because I don't, I'm not around people like that. So I don't notice it, like I don't know how to spot it. And when you started pointing them out to me, I was like, oh yeah, you're totally right. And then as you started noticing it more, it's like there were 3 of us that were very on point. You, me, and Jung, we were like always present. And it's almost like it gave her permission to kind of like check out like moments at a time. Which, that's my assumption and kind of my interpretation of what was going on. But there were definitely times when she had that like manic energy, and she was like really on top of things and like organizing.
Too much.
Yeah. And so all of that, and I remember she's a Gemini. So so there's kind of like that duality of like personalities kind of conflicting sometimes too.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, so I don't really know how it was before but I definitely noticed like when I started, there was like, kind of there was a little bit of a click, not totally, but, there were people who had been there a really long time who kind of just like did their own thing. And then there were like, and then there were some of you who had all been there around about the same time, about 2 years, somewhere there, 2.5 years. And I didn't really know what to expect at all. Because of course I've never worked in a dungeon before. So I wasn't really sure what to expect. And I was part-time, so I wasn't there during the day a lot. I was there during the evenings and then on weekends. But, like before we get into like our viewship, I remember my first session very, very well because it was with you. Okay. So it was my first, there were a few things that like started that I was really hesitant about, which was they required nude photos.
Yep. Immediately.
And that wasn't an option. That was something that was like a requirement. And as someone who's never really taken photos, who's always been on the other side, and of course, other side of fashion photos, so people aren't nude in them, I was very like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. Oh my God. And you took my photos. So,
yes.
Which made it a lot easier knowing that it wasn't just like some random guy taking my photos and someone who was working there. But it was very like, especially the outfits that were, I didn't choose any of those outfits. Like I didn't choose any of those outfits.
Yeah, you certainly didn't choose that, like that China, the communist flag outfit. Oh wait, no, the dragon lady. That was, and the chainmail one, that was pretty funny.
Yeah, there was some that I was just like, okay, I definitely didn't choose these, and I was like, okay. And then it was just like certain positions that I was just like, like I straight up said to her, I remember saying this, I straight up said to her, I do not want my butthole showing.
Oh, but you don't even know what being the photographer was like, because I also had the same, experience as you going in, like the next day they booked a photo shoot with me with the male photographer that they had on. I don't know who he was, and he was Asian, and I asked him what kind of photos he took, and he's just like, I normally do drone photos. And I'm like, you mean like landscape stuff? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So, okay, and so that's when I, was like, I should be taking the photos, like I know how to talk to these girls. I'm one of them, and I can make them feel more comfortable, and I can sneak in some butthole photos. No, but what it was that I was being demanded of the pink and brown photos, which were, all about the genitalia. Yeah. And it was like a really tough spot for me, because I didn't feel good that these people like you and all the new girls, like they didn't know that this was a part of it. And I feel like it undermines the whole aspect of like being a dominatrix, like having these very vulnerable and exposed photos of you taken before you even really know what you're going to be doing, and having to agree to that.
Yeah. So I think you did a good job. Like when you took my photos, like, I think I even said it to you. Like, I was like, I really like, from some of the photos I've seen, I'm really uncomfortable with someone just like being that close to my butthole, like, or anything. And I think I said it to you because I think my photos weren't as explicit as some of the previous people. So like, it was done a lot more carefully. And I think that was like me speaking to you about it. Like I'm really uncomfortable with this thing,
Yeah.
And so that was like in itself a very, like, I felt like there was this thing that I was really wanting to be a part of, right? To understand more. I didn't need the money. So it wasn't about money, but I wanted to really I was so curious about kink and BDSM, and this was something that was calling to me. And so I felt like I had no other option in a lot of ways to like agree upon this thing, right? That also didn't really make sense to me of like, well, why is there nude photos if like traditionally, doms, don't do this, and I'm not saying anything about like it lowers your dominance if you're nude, but like if you're starting, like shouldn't that be a kind of a choice,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of went along because I felt like I didn't have another opportunity like this. So like I had to agree with it, but it definitely like shook me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can, I feel like that's probably why they would always seek like absolutely green people, not people that have been in the scene or anybody that has like any experience at other places. They wanted to train absolutely like unexperienced people. Um, and I think, their business model isn't like a dungeon. It's not, they don't call themselves a dungeon. The technical, like legal term that I've heard them be called is a body house, because dungeons don't do nudity. Like there is no like upgrade for nudity. If nudity happens, it's on the dom's terms, not up to the person who's paying them. So there's this like money dynamic that is different that was different at the place where we worked. And because they didn't call themselves by all the kind of like proper BDSM terms, they were like, they had different names for themselves and a different business model for themselves. They felt like their business was unique in that we were more like interchangeable pawns rather than individuals. And I think also that was one of the reasons that they didn't want us to wear red lipstick or have too many tattoos.
Yeah, there was like a lot of interesting, like there were a lot of like rules, right? Like, like there were some aspects that like I was like, oh, they're having you read this and having you watch these things, and I'm like, oh well, like that's good, like learn the basics of some stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was the handbook that was really like, wow.
The handbook. So the handbook was very descriptive and extensive, and I don't know how many pages there are, but there are, and this is the very last bit of the handbook before the epilogue. The very last bit of the handbook is a list of things how to make more money quickly. And so there's like number 1, like how, like skills. Number 2, make a personal connection. Number 3, expand your range. And number 4, number 5. And then the very last number is boobs. And there are 6 paragraphs about boobs. And why you should get big fat boobs, and how boobs are going to make you money, and how men, prefer natural boobs, just like women prefer nice guys, and the amount of dissent that you get from your boyfriend or husband is never going to amount to the money that you can make if you got boobs, and we can hook you up with a good surgeon, and the 2 weeks that you get off from your augmentation surgery will be compensated, and all this stuff. And I was like, they really value boobs, really fucking big, boobs. And, and I see a lot of questions here about kind of like, why were they like this? And I think that the main reason is that the headmistress and her business partner, they had a very specific idea of how they wanted to run things. It wasn't about individuality. It wasn't about autonomy. It wasn't about freedom. And it wasn't about like what kind of dominatrix you could be. It was about being what they wanted you to be, pretty much.
Yeah. I think, so I think that's the thing, is like every house is different, every domination house is slightly different. There's obviously some overlapping things with them. And every domination house has its good and its bad. And for those who frequent them, like, I get it, a lot of times you can get in really quickly. The fee is not, the tribute is not high because you are seeing a lot of new folks. It's a great place to see a variety of folks. There's obviously pros and cons with a lot of these, right? And it's, but it is something that is important for people to understand what happens at these houses a lot of times, because you do need to understand that there is a certain amount of, like, exploitation that is happening.
And trauma bonding.
Yeah. And just keep that in mind, right? Like, I think everyone hears of different companies and different places where you might like, oh, I hear this is how they treat their employees. I don't want to go to that restaurant, or I don't want to go to that store. I don't want to buy from this company or whatever. And I think we're coming into a place where people can be more aware of that. But like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't take it back in the sense that that's how I met Dia. That's how I met a lot of really good friends. And I didn't feel like there were other options, as many options for me at the time, at least. And so I learned a lot. But there was also a lot of like shitty things that really happened.
Yeah.
Too.
And honestly, like, I don't feel, I agree with Lucy in that, like, I learned a lot. I wouldn't take any of it back. And I don't feel like I was personally traumatized by the exploitation or their silly rules or whatever. It was just kind of like a, oh, let me take note of that and not to do that when I go independent, because I knew that place had a ceiling for me, and it was just a matter of time. It was really comfortable. It was easy. But I didn't think that I would be staying there forever, and so there was going to be a break at some point. And it was just, what can I get while I'm here?
Yeah. I think for those who have really, and this is my advice for those who a lot of people go in a house and start a house. There's a lot of benefits. You see a multitude of different clients and personality types and stuff like that. And so you can learn. And I have a lot of my amazing clients I knew from my house stays and stuff. Like, there are a lot of great people. Like, I have, we're good friends still with a few doms we worked with, management tends to be the thing that's very questionable, right? And so there were things that if you have a really strong sense of self, then you can kind of get through it. But I think during our time there, we saw a lot of people crumble under it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I arrived, it was a whole different cast of players. And there were some people who weren't into the sisterhood idea. They were like free agents, and they did their own thing, and then they got out. Maybe they sensed the toxicity of management way before I was able to sense it. But I would say that as I came in, and then a couple of other women, and then Lucy, that kind of was the beginning of an actual sisterhood. And it was the kind of sisterhood that I've never been able to find anywhere else in the world. And it grew, of course, and kind of morphed into something bigger as we left. But within the dungeon walls, so to speak, it was like it was like we felt like we could all trust each other, but we couldn't necessarily trust management.
Yeah. And so I think that was kind of a really bonding thing, is like, hey, here's all of us who kind of started this thing, who didn't have much past experience, and then just seeing different personalities. And like, but I think it really depended, because I think even when I started, there were some of the Dom players who didn't really want to get close or didn't want to connect. And that in itself was like fine, but I'm kind of a community and family oriented individual. And so like, that was something that was really important to me, and like, made a point of it. And also because a lot of us, we did doubles and triples and group sessions, and you want to get along with people, and you want to be able to play well with each other, or else like it would suck. But I think like, so when I did start, like I like loved Dia's tattoos. Like I remember seeing her on the site and being like, oh my God, she's so beautiful. And I love her hair and her tattoos and your look and everything. And the other person I really enjoyed, who I think I replaced technically, was, what was her name?
Mistress On.
Yeah.
She was a brutal player and really like kind of gave no fucks.
So I think she left when I came in, like really close, I guess. And so it was unfortunate because I never got to meet her. And I felt like a lot of people said we had some similar energy aspects to us. Mm-hmm. But I remember being really enamored by both of you, like when I first was like looking on the site and stuff like that. And my first training session was with you, with Baby Arm Chris.
If anybody could guess why his name was Baby Arm Chris, we will give you a thumbs up.
And he was so teeny. Remember? Yeah. I was like, okay, yeah. Baby Arm Chris. And I remember like the little notes, and I was like, okay. And I just obviously wasn't really sure what to expect, right? And there was like all these acronyms, and I was like, what the fuck is all of these, And then, so I remember our first session, and I think it was like maybe 2 hours. Yeah, it was definitely 2 hours. And he was just such a like teeny guy. And I was just like, holy shit. Like, I was like, holy shit, right? And it was all CBT. And I was just like, cool. And you actually, you taught me how to do CBT bondage. And I think we needed to like double up the rope to keep going.
Some of it was short.
Yeah. And I remember doing the helicopter. Like,
oh, that's the fun one.
yes. So, if any of you can imagine what the helicopter is,
in regards to CBT bondage.
Yeah. And you're like, and you can do this. It's called the helicopter. You're like, and he was just like, whoa, but he seemed to have like, have had a bit of it. And I was like, oh, and I fell in love. I remember laughing so hard during that training session. And I was just like, I get to do all this fucked up shit.
Yes.
I was just like, my inner sadism that I had fucking shoved down and all of that. And like my inner fucking freak and pervert weirdo-ness that I had been like really suppressing for a good portion was like let loose. And I was just like, yes. Yeah. And then I think we used the big clear cock and ball crusher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that was like really fun. And I was like, how tight can we go? And it was a blast. It was
we had so much fun, and it makes me feel so warm inside to know that your first training session like made you feel so liberated and excited to be, where you were, because that's is there an echo? That's how I felt when I did one of my very first training sessions, and it satisfied my perverted heart to the highest degree that I when I left, my head was not attached to my body, because it was with a submissive who was in the food service industry, and he brought these yellow rubber gloves, these dishwashing gloves, and Crisco, and we use them to insert our hands into him. And I was like, what, like how twisted and perverted is it to use kitchen items on a person who works in the food service industry to to insert your hand into this person. And I was just like, I get to be a massive pervert and get paid for this, and this is like a job, yes. So we both kind of had a similar feeling of like, yes,
yeah,
this is it.
Because I think like there was something like my first scene had to do with CBT, right? And your first scene had to do with this like really perverse, intrusion, right? And I think it matched our personalities, because one of my first kind of like personal like exploration of like sex was with like my first love. My best friend was, my first everything when I was really young. And one of the thing I remember doing, and I write about it on my site, was like putting his balls in my hand and squeezing them, and just like wanting to know what it like felt like, and where the point of like couldn't bear it pain started. And it was very CBT focused. Like I was very drawn to like the idea of just like having someone, like having your hand around someone's nuts and squeezing and just feeling their pain because it was in your hands, but like seeing it and everything, and then having them let you go a little further, because that's what I said to, my first boyfriend, where I was just like, I remember saying like, can I squeeze your balls? And he was just like, sure. And I think it was the first time we had sex. It was the first time for both of us. And so we were exploring each other's bodies, right? And I really wanted to know. And so I was like, does it hurt? And he goes, I don't know. And I was like, well, can I squeeze them until they hurt? And he was like, sure. And, like we trusted each other and we were just exploring. And I think he was just happy to have someone's hands on his balls, maybe.
And also that you were so maybe like it was your desire, being played out, and he got to like play a part in pleasing you in whatever weird way you wanted to be pleased,
Yeah. And so I just remember squeezing them and really getting like this warm sensation in my heart and like in my body, like squeezing them, and him just sort of taking it even more and more until it was a point where he was just like, ow, like that really hurts, and then I remember letting go and he was like, cool, like he was just like fine with it, wasn't upset. And I just like remember doing that a few times. And so having my first scene be something like that was like, it felt like a full circle moment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm back at this, and it's a whole different level of it now.
Yeah. Like, I don't even remember what my second training session was. It was with, I believe it was with Jung, but I don't even remember. Like that first scene was so like, and I have to find my old diary because I wrote about maybe the first 50 sessions. I wrote in my diary an entry for each one.
Wow.
And,
you had a diary.
Yeah. So like I had a diary and I wrote about each one. So I have to find it because I know I have it somewhere, but it might be in storage. But I remember finding it like a few years ago and like reading it a little and be like, oh my God.
I hope you published that.
Yeah. Albert was one of my first 10 sessions. He was in one of my training sessions. Yeah.
What a character, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was like Santa Claus's like fucked up little brother.
Yeah. Stoned, fucked up. Yeah, totally.
But very Santa-like.
I don't think do you think he's alive anymore?
I don't know, but I sometimes imagine people who are like really old and like Keith Richards, like these people can live forever.
Yeah. Possibly. I always, like I really, I used to see Albert a lot. I remember like for a while it was like weekly. He would come and see me weekly. But it was always like, I really enjoyed him, but he would always come stoned,
Yeah.
You would find food in his beard all the time.
Mm-hmm. Didn't want to get too close to his mouth.
Yeah. There was like, he also didn't hear very well. So then there was a lot of that. And sometimes he would fall asleep in session.
Yeah.
No matter what was being done.
Yeah.
And when you're a new dom, like you don't really know how to deal with that.
So
sometimes I'd be like, Albert. I'd be like, oh.
He would jerk awake like he didn't know where he was.
And he'd be like, oh, headmistress. I'm like, okay, like what, like, yeah, it was always very entertaining to see him and trained many of Dom's with him. I
Oh,
when he
wow.
got
Yeah.
set on fire that one time. I'm gonna say this because I did not set Albert on fire, but this is stuff that happens at a house, okay? And why you want to keep this in mind by going to the house, like you deal with a lot of new people. So there is some, if you're a foot fetishist, going to a house has no problems. There's no risks, right? You're a foot fetishist. There's not much that can go wrong. But for those of you who like to play a little more intensely, heavily, dangerously, see a pro that has been in the business for a bit. Go to someone independent. They're going to be much more capable, right? You got to be careful with some of this. So Albert was being a training sub, and I was training 2 DOMs at the time. 2 people started at the same time. And so, he didn't really need much, but I was training them and stuff. And I was showing them how to use candle wax, and just like how to hold the candle and kind of where to put it and stuff like that. And being careful, on skin, going over it. And so I showed them, and then they were doing a bit of it. And I turned around to grab something really quick. And one of the girls he had lots of hair, had set him on fire with the candle wax and did not notice, while the other Dom who started at the same time, who is a good friend of both Dia and I's, like put him out, was like, and he just did not even notice that he was on fire while she was like patting out the fire, and he had all his chest hair had singed. He totally didn't even notice. And like I turned around because you smell hair on, like I turned around, I was like, what the hell just happened? And she was like, oh, it's all good. He totally didn't notice. I think he lost his sense of smell in general with his hearing or whatever. And then afterwards, she was just like, well, he was set on fire. Because I was like, what happened? Because I saw all this hair singed off and everything. I was like, what happened, you guys? And it was just like, and then afterwards, she was just like, well, she got it a little too close. She didn't last that long, the one who set him on fire. She was only there for maybe 4 months or something.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. And she was like, I accidentally. And I was like, yeah, I told you, you're dealing with fire. Fire hair are not compatible.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, so many stories.
Yeah. But
I remember we would sometimes sneak in some pimple popping.
Oh my God. That was definitely you and me.
Yeah, we were the notorious stealthy pimple poppers. Like somebody would be on their back and Lucy would be like, all right, now just just lay there and think that you're totally strapped down and you're at our mercy. And she's running her hand along the back, and then she finds something, she's like, and I'm like, and she keeps talking, and I'm like,
and then sometimes they'd be like, oh, what are you doing, mistress? And I was like, focus. You need to well, Dia is trying to poke this thing. I was like, you're here to focus on me right now. Don't even pay attention to what
don't get distracted.
Yeah, what Zhao is doing right now. Don't get distracted. You need to worship my feet, Zhao. Tia would be in the back, just trying.
Getting the paper towels, getting the gloves, getting the alcohol, because that was our own little fetish that we had to fulfill. Oh yeah, skin tags too.
Oh yeah, we would definitely, but we would ask about that because we have to cauterize those, and that take a little bit. And then and then we started just telling people we started saying this. I think I remember using this line a lot. Do you know you have this thing on your back? Let me. I would go, do you know you have this thing on your back? You know, don't worry, I'll get it for you. I think it'll be good for you. And then we'll just start talking. And I was like, I'm being, you know, like, don't worry. People pay a lot of money to get this stuff off. Like, let me help you here.
Yeah.
Just
I would say like, oh, I have a grooming fetish and you brought me a gift. Let me get this thing.
Which is accurate. Oh my God.
Yes, it is.
Well, until the time that you had got that really, really huge one.
Oh,
and it stunk up the whole dungeon. Like every room could smell it, the whole hallway. It had, the smell had permeated everything. I had to hide in our closet, that our wardrobe closet, because the smell had like
it was. I don't know if anybody here watches Pimple Popper, Dr. Pimple Popper, but it was like a massive amount of like that, like cheesy looking stuff that smells really bad. And I didn't know how much was in there, you know, and this was one of my very first pimples to pop. And I had strapped my sub onto like a stool where his legs were on the ground and his arms were reaching down.
It was Charlie Bear, right?
Yeah, it was Charlie Bear. And his torso was on the seat of the thing, so he was basically like a stool. And I mounted him, and he had these, you know, large humps that were smooth on his back. So there wasn't like a head where I could see stuff coming out. I just didn't know what was going to come out. I didn't know what was going to happen. So being the enthusiastic and curious pimple popper novice that I am, I went ahead and bore all my weight down onto him as I was straddling him. And I was wearing this little red, you know, stretchy dress. And that stuff like shot out at full force, ricocheted off my dress and back into his hair. And it was like, it came out like when you smash a tooth, the toothpaste. And it was so surprising and so enthralling that I didn't know what to do. Like I was just like,
you had a shocked face.
I'll be right back. You know,
the face.
Did not have goggles, didn't have any personal protective equipment, none of that. So I like left the room and I went, you know, walked into the hallway, walked into the office where everybody was sitting, and they saw the big gob of like, you know, cheese on my.
I thought it was Crisco.
Yeah, it was
so much of it. I thought
and yellowish.
But you had the most shocked look on your face. Like you didn't really, you like walked in like this, because I remember your hands were out because it was like,
yeah.
And you were just like, and I was like, is that Crisco? And then you're like, there was a pimple. And then I was like, and then the smell came in and we all just jumped and like had to find safety.
I was stunned and I didn't have words, and everybody reacted accordingly. You know, like I would have done the same. I would have run away from that smell. It was very smelly. But then I came to my senses and I changed my dress and then went back in there and was just like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
There was definitely some like hilarious like moments with being with people. Like, you know, some of our best clientele came from there. I had so many like really amazing times, and like the diversity of scenes you go into, you know, in all honesty, like I love having the control I do as a independent now to really pick and choose who I want to see. But I really love these random surprise sessions where you're just like, okay, I have an appointment today that, you know, because we had a rule where when you were on call, you could be anywhere, but your on call means that you have to be there in an hour.
Yeah.
So you had an hour to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Which made it good. You had a lot of freedom in that, as long as you understood like how long it would take you to get there. And so sometimes things would like pop up and you would get something like a mohair sweater fetish. And you're just like, okay, and then you'd be like, I don't have a mohair sweater. You'd be like, oh no, he'll provide them.
Yeah.
and then there's a few of you wearing like these mohair sweaters, like hugging each other and talking about your mohair and talking about how good it feels and like all this stuff. So it's always like, it was fun having these like really random stuff happen that, you were just like, this is what we're doing today. And it just like, it really helped show me how different and how there's somebody and something for somebody, you know?
Yeah.
And there's such a variety of kinks and fetishes and fantasies, and it just runs the gamut of
everything. I remember there was this one client who had a very specific fetish that now has a name, but before I didn't know that there was a name or a whole community, and they're called Looners. So they're like balloon lovers, they love the sound of balloons and popping balloons, but he wasn't specifically just a looner. He had like I guess you would call it a deformity where the hairs inside of your ears were extremely sensitive or more sensitive than usual, and he had to wear earplugs all the time. So the idea of a person like a beautiful woman holding this thing that could potentially cause him a lot of pain in his ears was very sexy to him. So, yeah. And when I first learned about him, I was like, so I just have to pop balloons, like, yes, I'm going to pop balloons. And I was very overzealous and I popped all the balloons and, and then I was just like, what's, what is this? What's in it for him? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what's the dynamic? Because I just got so excited about popping balloons. Like, when do you get to pop balloons? Most people, when they get balloons, they don't want you to pop them. They want you to keep them in the sky or in the air so that people can see them, so that, it can indicate the party or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of the things that I learned about that was really exciting to do, was like popping balloons.
Yeah.
Which who knew?
I know. I've pretty much had a lot of like really there was a lot of interesting, there was a lot of some basic ones. There was a lot of, but there were things that unfortunately, like, yes, this is kind of the beauty of being independent, like not having to do the sessions that did not resonate with you, or clients that you just had no chemistry with, or activities and sessions you just had no interest in. And so like I learned very quick that I am not a mommy, type of, like, I don't like adult babies unless it's based in humiliation and degradation, but actual adult babies that I have to like mommy and like coddle and care for, I hate. And that purely came out of like one specific client that I was like, I never want to see this person again. And they would always want to have me included. And I was like, and then they would always ask me, they'd be like, well, he's asking if, because it was always a group scene. He was like, well, he really wants you because he sees you as like the mean babysitter. And I was just like, I won't be able to control how mean I am. I really do not want to see this person.
It was actually fun watching you be mean to him.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be mean to him too. But it was like, I couldn't exactly find like how to be mean to him. It was because it was fun also to just to tease him.
Yeah.
That was more fun, but it was fun watching you be mean.
Yeah. I was not a fan of those ones.
Yeah. And also people who have like a fully written script
Oh my
and
God.
and then come in with like a big notepad of like number 1, number 2, number 3, and
Oh
then
my
they have
God.
all these like toys and tools that are for only one specific thing, and they basically bring in like a suitcase and make a presentation and then tell you, okay, you do this
For 10 minutes.
right.
And then say, oh, you did a good job. Okay, now let's move to this thing. That was the worst. And Dee and I are talking about the same client who, like, we both, I think, ended up saying we don't want to see this person ever again.
Yeah, I remember you saying there was this where you were like, it was toward the end of the scene, and he would never really book enough time for all the things he wanted to do.
Yeah.
But so we would have to like, you know, double time everything. And he was, I guess, like in some kind of like trash bag full of pee. And I think you were like choking him or something. And you really wanted to choke him to death, but you couldn't.
I really did. I do not feel that way about a lot of people, and I wanted to kill him. I really did. And he was just like, because part of his fantasy was to die, you know, like to be dead and buried, right? Was like the ending of it. Like, you know, it had a role play snuff aspect to it. And I was just like,
take the hands off the neck. Don't actually kill him.
Because it was one of those. It was like, so like, what is the point of seeing someone if you're like literally one of those, you know, like when you're in a meeting and you have one of those big like written boards where you could like, they're like one of those big presentation sheets, you know, it was huge. And he would have it up and he would have how long each activity he wanted to happen for how long. And he would give you these scripts you would have to read. And it was just like, what is the fucking point?
Well, I think that he wasn't really looking for a dominatrix.
Yeah.
He was looking for a service top or just like a kinky, you know, person to play with. And it was strictly role play. It was like not about dominating him.
Yeah. And it just like was so like, I just like felt so shuffled in everything where he'd be like, okay, you're done with this one. Now we got to do this part. So here's this. And I'm just like, and for someone, and yeah, I, you know, being newer and everything and starting a house, like you do that, you service top a lot, but that was not who I was as a person and as a dom in general, as many people who do play with me know, like that irked me so much. And it just like, yeah, I was like, I want to kill you. So
now I wonder about him and his anxiety. Like, is he still alive?
Jesus, you know, going from house to house, giving people their little like sheet of items of like what you need. Like the script I had one time was like, he like didn't even print it out. So it was even hard to read. He had handwritten a script for me and another dom at the house. And it was a good 20 to 25 pages.
What?
Yeah. And he'd be like, oh no, you have to stand over here to say these lines. And she's going to stand here. And while she's doing this, you're going to say this part. Right. And I think that was like, I maybe had like 3 or 4 sessions with him. And I said, no, never again. No, I refuse to do any sessions with this person anymore. Like I would come out of that so angry and so drained and just be like, I would like hate myself. Like I'd come out of that like truly hating myself.
Like, well, I'm glad that you don't have to do that anymore, because that was definitely like the epitome of service topping. And, I think service topping was fun sometimes, but it was also just like, this person was so fussy that they basically just made it not fun for everybody.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it was fun for him.
Like, I don't know, like, clearly no Dom had fun in it. Like, you would see all our faces and all of us would just be like, yes, and now lay on the ground, and you would just be reading these lines like deadpanned and just like checked out, and like that's no good for anybody, right?
No,
Like,
definitely not.
yeah, and if he was like, I think if he was generous and was more like, hey, I know, and self-aware about it,
And
like
appreciative.
he was very entitled about it too. If he was like, hey, I know this is like really particular, but like, like my kink and my fetish is really particular. And if you can like, like there was just no leeway for any other creativity beyond how he wanted you to do every single thing. And he would like always like book as little time as possible and try to have you speed up and shove everything in, and then like all kinds of stuff, and like was never generous. And when you go to a house, for all of you out there, if you see a house Dom, tip them, tip them, tip them, tip them.
Yeah.
I mean, you should be tipping any person who offers you an amazing experience, to be honest, because there's a lot that go in it, but houses usually take a really big cut. And so tip them, because that's something that they get to keep fully.
Yeah.
That was the other thing that really pissed me off, is like we had to be nude for sessions for people who upgraded, and we got only half of that, half of even the nude rate, when I'm like, what about this? What about me being nude means I have to give you 50% of this?
Yeah. And that was the biggest, like, to me, that was the biggest undermining of like dominance. And also the nudity had to happen within 10 minutes of the session starting, or else in dungeon terms, you were stealing from them.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of mentality that was like forced on us all the time. It's like, if you don't do this, you're stealing from us. If you don't do this, you're stealing from the client. If you don't do this, you're stealing, you're stealing, you're stealing. It was always about us stealing. And it was never, like, we weren't there to steal, we were there to like experience things and learn things and have fun. So
Yeah.
it was always just kind of like put on us that we were somehow stealing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, in all honesty, like I would say 90% of my clients at the house were really amazing, I would say. And there was definitely, a small subset, 10%, that were like bad. And I had 2 scary incidences at the house, which, knock on wood, I've never had independent. And this is why screening is really important. Like, for those of you who are going to eventually watch this and are new, the reason why we screen is because it's our safety. And so when you're at a house, they do the screening. And so there's a bit more protection for you because there's more people there and stuff like that. When you're independent, you're alone. So you have to be, for those of you who are like, I don't want to get screened, then you know what? Like, then go to a house, because they're still going to screen you and you cannot expect people to put their safety on the line. And I was thankful these incidences happen at the house, because that's how I was able to get out of them. But like, this is also why I don't offer fantasy wrestling anymore. I had a fantasy wrestling client that I had seen, 2 or 3 times before, and was always really great. And, and fantasy wrestling is this. It's not really wrestling. If you want competitive fetish wrestling, we did an interview about it. There are people who offer that who have the size, have the skills, the knowledge, all of that. And it's like, I'm not a wrestler, especially like back then too. And so I had seen, and it was clear that it was a fantasy wrestling, that it would be kind of playful, but there was no true like competitiveness and all of that. And the first few times I saw him, it was exactly that. And it was really, totally fine. And I think like I may have seen him only twice. And then the third time I saw him, he literally put me in a chokehold and I almost passed out. And I like it really, like, I think you were there, Dia, when I came back in the office and I was just crying.
Yeah.
Because like I kicked him in the balls for him to get off of me, and I got out, and I remember telling our, main person, I was like, I can't go back in there. Like, I don't want to ever see this person again. This is what happened, And it was like, it was really, really scary. The second time I had this scary incident, it was a new client, and it was a evening client. It was new person. And like, they just like kept trying to grab and lunge at me. And luckily I was kind of like, the first thing I did was put on a choke collar. I just initially put on a choke collar, like I kind of had a collar in a certain way so that if I pulled it, it would choke them. I kind of just started it that way because something about them, like when I walked in, gave me just like a really icky feeling. And thank God I did that, because every time, like, I was explaining, like, you can't touch me without my permission and like all these things. He lunged at me twice and I yanked it and it dropped him because it choked him, dropped him. And I said, I will be right back. And I went out, and then I was like, I'm not going to see this person. Like, they've lunged at me twice. I don't feel safe with them. And they kicked him out. But like,
wow, I didn't know about that one.
Yeah. But like, yeah, that's why I don't offer fetish wrestling. I think, it can be really fun. But like after that incident, it really like scarred me. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the thing is, like, I think I'm a pretty like I can fend for myself quite well, but the reality is I'm still a petite, small individual that any male-bodied individual could overpower me if they wanted to, and that does not make me feel good. You know? So.
Yeah, I mean, and just like the thing with houses also is that they can vet somebody, they can get their ID, they can whatever, but they don't fully know how this person is going to act in a session.
Yeah.
Especially like if they have been drinking, or it's, I don't know, like after, if they've had a really crappy day, these kind of things only we can sense because we're in the room with them. So it is better to always like have a safety call, or if you're working at a dungeon, having somebody on hand.
Yeah.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about our departure, and kind of the days leading up to that, because as Lucy had mentioned, I did the photography for them shortly after I arrived, and I was the staff photographer for the 7 years that I was there, the only staff photographer, and I think I did a pretty good job. Like I would implement like different angles and different areas of each of the playrooms, and I was pretty creative because that's what I studied in school, and it made me feel good to be able to kind of bring in these new girls with a little bit more guidance as to like how to be more comfortable in front of the camera, or how to like feel sexy in front of the camera.
And not have to show your butthole all the time.
Right. Like it was definitely something that I had to mitigate because, management wanted a lot of pink and brown. And I was just kind of like, let me tell you what the deal is, new girl. And you can get more comfortable with the idea, or you can just say no, like I'm here to like just take photos. I'm not trying to like get you to open up in that way. But so after many years of being the staff photographer, I was like, I think I deserve a raise. So I asked for like I think a $10 an hour raise or something like that. And headmistress was like, okay, let me get back to you. And then she said, okay, no problem, the next day. And then I was like, great, that was easy. And then the day after or shortly after, they presented me with this contract. And I was obviously a dom there who had been there for quite a while. At this point, I was one of the senior doms who had been there the longest. And I was training new doms with no pay for that amount of work. I was also doing the photos for peanuts and also doing a lot of the styling and coordinating and makeup even for the photo shoots. So, so they presented me with this contract after giving me a small raise, and the contract was to for me to sign away sole and exclusive rights of all the photos that I had taken. And this is over 6 years time of 6 years of photos that I had taken of all the doms and myself as well. And to just sign it over. And like I had mentioned, I studied this in school, and I also worked as a professional photographer. And what they were trying to do was basically a buyout, but not offer any money. So I was just like, well, if you want all these photos and you want sole and exclusive rights of them, then you're going to have to pay for them. And they did not like that. So after I said that, they said, okay, you can come get your things, which meant that I was fired, which meant that I was fired as a dom and not just a photographer. I was fired both as a photographer and a dom. And I was like, that is some bullshit. But okay, like this is their business. They get to call the shots. I'm just a peon to them. I'm very replaceable. So that was basically how I exited. I was let go, and they put up some bullshit about like me finding my own path or whatever, which I did in some way. And so as I left, of course, all the other doms, we had become a lot closer and we had formed a sisterhood bond. They were like, what happened? And so I just explained to them this very simple thing that happened. And I think some of them were like shook. They were like, if that can happen to you, then what's going to happen to us? So yeah, that was the beginning of the end. That was kind of like, I think, the beginning of the mass exodus that did follow shortly after I left.
Yeah, because we both were pushed out around the same time. So there was that with you, and then with me, because for the last how many years that we were there, Dee and I did all the training, like exclusively, because the headmistress was just unavailable, unaware. She, disappeared all the time. And that had to do with like, another thing about all houses is if a house is said that they're run by a woman, it's usually not. It's usually, there's a female face and a male in the background, and there's, I think, some problematic things with that. But so, we dealt with a lot, and for a while I was helping manage because a few things, like the unreliability of the headmistress, and I was de facto the person everyone would go to for a lot of like having to deal with shit. I ended up being the de facto person for everybody, you know, when a problem would occur, which was often. And so then I ended up starting to manage, and and then I feel like because I feel like she like disconnected even more, because it was like, oh, well, Lucy's there, so, you know, I don't have to deal with shit, right? And I'd be like, but like, you still do.
Yeah.
And then, so there was a few things that happened to me that really fucking pissed me off. Like, really fucking pissed me off. So one was the fact that the owner, the other owner, didn't like something that I was given permission to do. And it wasn't like something big. It was, you know, for most of you all know that I'm a big music person, and I was given permission we weren't allowed to play our own music in session.
No, and I can tell you why.
Yeah.
I can tell you why.
Yeah.
Don't complain or make negative comments about the music. Our client demographic is 40 to 60-year-olds who relate to the music and find it an unexpected pleasure in session. Most of the music is easy on the ears for the clients and has some relevance to their youth and domination.
Yeah. So I wasn't, you know, we weren't allowed to play our own music. They had set playlists that expect, but they also called it a Pavlovian response, which is not how that works. But, you know, hearing the same songs, right? And for those of us who are there, hearing the same fucking music over and over that didn't feel connected to a scene and to a client sometimes was really, really hard. And I would talk about music a lot, and many other people knew that, and, you know, and really a lot of my clients really enjoyed that I was so, you know, that I loved music so much. And I had gotten permission to be able to play my own music, which I took a lot of care and time in curating music for each of my scenes, you know. And so I'd been doing it for years because I had gotten permission already. I'd been doing it for years. And then all of a sudden, I got in trouble for it by the male owner, and they decided to fuck with my money. So, and by fuck with my money, I had a really busy like week. They took me off schedule. They gave all my clients to other DOMs, you know, and said some bullshit like, oh, she's sick or something like that. And so we're going to have to, like, you know, how about we schedule you with so-and-so? And so when you work there full time and in the line of work we do, you don't work, you don't make money at all. It's not like there's some guarantee. It's not like you have sick pay. It's not any of that. If you do not work, you do not make money. So all of a sudden, I'm making $0 because they wanted to do a power play on me. They didn't like, you know, they didn't like the fact that most of the other DOMs listened to me over them. They didn't like the fact that, you know, like I had more loyalty, you know, towards me over them. And so, and then a big part of it is they didn't like the fact that I had created a FetLife account. You were not allowed to have any social media. You were not allowed to speak about what you did. You were not allowed to talk about any of that.
You had to follow the advice on this little piece of paper entitled "Shut Your Pie Hole."
Yes. So, so because, they wanted to show that, like, they basically wanted to push me down so that they showed that they still had the power. So they took all my money away for about a week and a half. I lost my shit and had like a 4 hour screaming match with the headmistress where she just sat there unable to look at me because she knew that she was fucking wrong. And it really wasn't actually her decision. It was his, which was a whole other thing. So that started the sort of down thing in my interaction with them, because they would do this quite a bit, try to fuck with my money, knowing that like they could. And so then they were like spying on me and were like, oh, you have this and you're not allowed to have this. You can't, and I was really unsure how they had information about like some of my private stuff, and basically gave me an ultimatum that if I didn't shut down everything and anything that was about me being a dom of any kind, even though it was my personal fet life to just explore, this community and this, all of that. If I didn't shut all that stuff down, that I would be required to leave. So that was how I was asked to leave. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was it was kind of crazy. There were a lot of like good things, especially a lot of amazing subs, a lot of amazing doms, but there was a lot of other fucked up shit that was going on.
I think that one of the biggest like fuck yous that they did to us, both Lucy and I, was that they took all of our social media handles before we even created social media accounts. So, on Instagram, Lucy Sweetkill would probably be Lucy Sweetkill if that name wasn't already being squatted on by some random nobody. It's an empty account. I believe some other iterations of her name are also.
It was like every iteration, because I've like, who the hell on social media is called Lucy Sweetkill? Like,
right.
I had quite a unique name that I chose. And when I went on to Instagram to start my account, because I had started that name on FetLife, as my own kind of space to like explore. But I wasn't looking for clients or anything. I was like wanting to go to events, And when I went on Instagram, every iteration of Lucy Sweetkill was taken for so long that I think I was like, I just got this iteration not that long ago, which is Mistress Sweetkill on Instagram. But I didn't even I wanted to just be Lucy Sweetkill, but it wasn't available for really, really because they had squatted all over those names.
And they're still squatting on all of mine. Yeah. So Dia Dynasty, Domina Dynasty, Domina Dia Dynasty. I don't know whatever else there is. I don't go by mistress. Excuse me. But all those iterations of my name on Instagram are also still being squatted on. And I've already asked, somebody like that works there if there's anything that can be done, and then there isn't. So surprisingly, they didn't do that on Twitter. They didn't take all of our names on Twitter, so we were able to at least exist in our preferred name on Twitter, which is way more useful to me anyway, because there's a little less censorship on Twitter.
Yeah, but it was crazy. Yeah, it was really crazy because nobody else knew what our names were, and like it was kind of crazy.
It was obvious what was going on because there was nobody else that would have done this, like consistently between the two of us, taken all of our possible handles on Instagram, except for
everything was saying it was like Lucy Sweetkill. All of a sudden, it was just like, oh, that name already is taken. That name, but there was nothing posted, and I was just like, how is it that this name that I don't think anyone, and trust me, like I did my research, like how all of a sudden, like that's just too unique, and like your name as well. There was a lot of it that was really,
yeah. And I think at that point, you know, we were like let's do a banishing spell, you know, like let's try to banish this person out of our lives. And I think that it worked for a little while. Maybe it's time to renew it because it feels like something's coming back around.
Yeah. And that kind of like, you know, we do want to open it up for questions. So if people want to ask questions, you're welcome to ask now. But so we just lost our La Maison de Rouge Instagram somehow. Even though if anybody has been on our La Maison de Rouge Instagram, we use it just to promote our videos. And so there was nothing there. But at the same time that happened, some other stuff kind of came out that we were like, huh. Mm-hmm. So we're wondering if someone has taken a renewed interest in trying to destroy us because I wouldn't put it past him. He's a vindictive, you know, shitty person.
And this person spends a lot of time on the internet, like researching and looking up our names and, you know, like he did this before we were independent and he still does it. So I am going to go through the comments box and sniff out some questions that were asked earlier.
Yeah.
And then we'll proceed with some of the other newer questions that are popping up.
Yeah, and for those of you who do have Instagram, if you're able to somehow like report, you know, and just let them know that an account was taken down and for no reason, that would be great. But we understand that we may not get our Instagram back. We're just, you know, so please follow us on Twitter and YouTube and why those things are really important. But we do have a few questions.
Yeah. Well, from the beginning, let's see. We've got a question from Michael Brzezinski. Question for both of you. Regarding ball busting CBT, what's your favorite thing about sacking a guy in the nuts? When sacking the nutsack, do you prefer boots, heels, electric play, or just punching?
All of the above.
Yep, all of the above. And my favorite thing about sacking a guy in the nuts is sacking a guy in the nuts.
There you go.
There you go. Let's see. Celeste Taylor has a lot of positive, encouraging words. Thank you, Celeste. So glad you got the hell out of there and went independent, blazed your own path. Yeah, us too.
Very much.
Let's see. Philip said he disagreed with the headmistress in their forum about the bigger equals better issue. She responded with a bunch of analytics defending her position.
Those were not her analytics, to be honest.
Yeah, she was a mouthpiece for the analytical brain, which was the other owner.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Getting a little hoarse. Sophia Hernandez would like to know, what is the longest and most brutal session whipping you have ever done a slave?
I prefer not to answer that.
And then her next question is the longest and most brutal whipping session you have ever done a slave. And then let's see. Longest and most brutal session. Okay, Sophia, we answered your question. Next question from Sophia. When you suspend your slave, what torture do you apply to him?
I prefer not to answer that either. I really don't like questions around like, you know, when you do this or when you do that. Like, if you really,
the most extreme scenario type questions.
Yeah, I feel like it's, just for somebody's like thrill. And I'm not interested in like feeding into your thrill of knowing what other people get done. If you're interested in like understanding what is possible, you can, first off, you can schedule a consultation. Or if you want to talk dirty, both Dee and I have Sex Panther. Sign up for our Sex Panther, and you want to talk about some dirty, kinky things. Yeah, you can text me about the dirty, kinky things, but I'm not going to answer these things.
Yeah, I think that I feel like these questions are a little obtuse in what we're actually talking about this time. Yeah. And I'm happy to answer questions that relate to, our baby dom days, or maybe some advice type of things for new doms or for baby doms that are maybe in a similar situation. But these are definitely
let's find questions that actually
pertain. One from SH. Did you discuss meditation and other stress relieving strategies together as a part of your trauma bonding process?
I don't know if we specifically discussed, like, are you talking also about during? I think during, a lot of times we would vent to each other when shitty things would happen. We would like go out and like have dinner or whatever. And a lot of us would vent. I would also hold a lot of like little gatherings at my apartment and have food and like have everyone hang out and enjoy themselves. And we would vent a lot. Yeah. There was a lot of venting.
And I think, given Lucy's historical experiences as a professional manager, she was really good at bringing people together for like, I guess, what is professionally called team building. And I think that was one of the most valuable things that she contributed to the sisterhood, like really giving us a space outside of work to just be like girls together, and to vent about stuff, but not make it all about work.
Yeah. And still have like a really good time.
Yeah. So Bobcat asks, what do you find the benefits of starting at a house or dungeon would be, other than the safety aspect, as you mentioned?
I would say for me, I would say the variety of different subs and different people with all types of interests and kinks. I think that was a really big benefit, like all the different personality types.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. And totally agree with that. And also just like watching, observing and learning the process of taking in new clients, vetting clients, how to interact with them in a way that was professional, but also like informative. I would have to say that that this particular dungeon, they kind of trained or made allowances for some clients to behave badly, and to be entitled or to be like what's the word? Instant gratification oriented.
Yeah.
But that was still a part of the learning process where we were like, okay, we won't do that.
Yeah.
Caesar asks, how did you find that place? I'm sorry. There's a lot more questions. Okay. Question: are you ever planning on opening up a femdom style escape room? Every femdom session is an escape room, honey.
Now get out.
Or stay forever. Okay. Bobcat asks, for each of you, if you could go back to when you were just starting out, what's one piece of advice you would give yourselves?
Do not stay as long as I fucking did.
Yeah, I mean, always trust yourself. Always trust your instinct. As Lucy mentioned, when she was going into that second like scary session, she felt something, so she had the she had the wits about her to put a choke collar on this person that kept lunging at her. Like how would you ever know that? And how could you have prepared yourself for that if you didn't trust your own instinct? So always, always, always trust your own instinct. I have a tendency to like kind of go by instinct quite a bit, or intuition. And I haven't had any scary experiences there, just a lot of frustrating ones. But it's definitely something that I think everybody should do for themselves, and only you know your own intuition. Nobody else can tell you what it is.
Yeah.
D. Tiresias asks, how was being indie shaped your interests and playstyles?
This is a real good question. I think I've gotten a lot, like, I think my play back in the house days, and also maybe because I was new, they were very, like, in some ways they weren't very deep, like, because we weren't allowed to build that type of relationship with a lot of our clientele unless they just saw us, but there was only so far it could go, right? And so I think things would stay on the surface a lot with my interactions, and they were fun, but they were like very surface level. And I think as someone independent, I'm building these really deep, closer relationships with a lot of my subs, even if I don't see them all the time. And that, for me, because there's such a variety of ways for us to stay connected and for them to get to know me through my social media and all of that, like, there's a deeper bond, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely agree with what Lucy says, is that there's the potential for that deeper bond to form, even if you don't have the client that wants that. Like, not every client's going to want that, which is totally cool, because you can have a wide gamut of people that want different things, which makes it like more manageable and more sustainable. Because if everybody wanted a deeper bond, that would be exhausting.
Yeah.
But also, I think for me personally, I have started to see more possibilities in how my interests in femdom and femme supremacy are expanding and getting deeper as well, into like a whole world of lifestyle domination, of of DS dynamics, of how to even employ people to like get with a philosophical program like ecofeminism, like so that people can actually make a difference in the greater world outside of BDSM, but using some BDSM like principles. And I think that that's kind of where I'm headed with Femdom Farm right now, which makes me feel really like on purpose. Like I finally have put all the pieces together of like my life within BDSM, within Femdom, but also like my art degree and my like love of nature and all these other more philosophical pieces, kind of like putting them together and being like, oh, now I get it. Really good question. Let's see. Philip asks, for each of you, is there a scene that would still give you that same OMG feeling that you got in your first session? That's a good question.
I think it's hard because it's like your first, right, of lots of things. Like, can you ever get the first again? It's really hard, but you can get something else that is as fulfilling and thrilling, right? For me, like, I think every time, in all honesty, like, I get to play the way I want to play now. Like, I I'm at that point in my career that I get to pick and choose and play the way I want to play, which in itself makes every scene really fulfilling, because it's not about like checking off stuff off a list, and it's not feeling like I'm doing it because I have to. I get to choose who I get to play with, and I get to choose how I get to play with that person, and of course respecting boundaries and stuff. But yeah, and that for me, that for me is immensely fulfilling. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I come from an entrepreneur family. So that alone of choice makes things a million times better.
Is there a scene? I think, yes, there is a scene or a set of scenes. And they have to do more so with, like I said, have a more lifestyle slant, or something that basically is not happening within a dungeon. I like the idea of like something that could feel very real to me and to whoever I'm playing with, but it's happening also in a real setting. Like, for example, at the farm, there's a shack in the woods, like a literal shack, and and I would love to, like chain somebody to that shack and leave them in there for an undisclosed amount of days with like a bowl of water and a shovel. And that to me is like, I have something I've never done before, and something that I actually have a desire to do and have fantasies around, and what would that be like for the other person, so yes.
Some dried peas, there you go.
Some peanuts. Some dried peas. Okay, so Peter H asks, when you both left the house, was LMDR the plan from day one? And if not, how did it come about?
It was. I planned LMDR after the first year I was in the house. Actually.
Oh, wow. That was like, you're like, okay, thinking ahead right away.
So a little bit about LMDR, how that all began too was after the first years. So I was there at the house for 5 years total. After the first year, I knew shit was up. I was like, shit is going to hit the fan, how things are going. I was like, there were things that like I knew just weren't aligning really well, but I wasn't ready, right? I didn't feel like I had enough. I was scared, to really go off my own. I didn't know what that looked like. And there was just still so much for me to learn. And so there was like a lot of back and forth, even the bad stuff. Then I would feel very like, I'd feel like, oh, well, then the other doms I'm leaving who I'm really close with and all this stuff. So there was a lot of back and forth for me emotionally about like leaving, but I had actually started a business plan that first year that we implemented a lot of the business plan that I had actually put together initially. And so I'd been just adding stuff to it. And then, and the name La Maison de Rouge, I think came about maybe like 3 years into me at the space. And for me specifically, when I came up with La Maison de Rouge, there was two aspects. And I actually spoke to someone about this recently. So La Maison de Rouge means the house of red in French, specifically, not a red house, the house of red. And being Vietnamese, I have a lot of French influence in my culture and in my family. So I knew I wanted something that represented that. The other thing with it is red as a color, but also like the symbol of red as a color and what it means has so many beautiful meanings with love, passion, courage, right? Blood, femininity.
Yeah.
So there was so much that came with like what the color red represents. It also represents country and home, which is why you see red in a lot of flags too. And red being a very prominent color in Asian, cultures, and being a color of luck and prosperity. And so it just like that was my thinking behind the name La Maison de Rouge. And I remember having dinner with you actually, Dia. I don't know if you remember this, but we actually went to a French restaurant, like this cute little French restaurant in the West Village. And I remember sitting with you saying, like, hey, obviously shit's getting weird. Like, would you want to go into business together? And so we had talked about it. I think the last year that, because I think we sensed that stuff was like going to go bad. And I think we were talking about like maybe 6 months before we both were pushed out. I feel like when that was what happened.
I recall like being in Whole Foods and us having some kind of like, we were upstairs at the Bowery Whole Foods and talking about this. And I was like, yeah,
we talked about it a few times, but the one I remember the most was at Bavette, at that restaurant.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That was something that, that Lucy had the foresight to start planning, and being the savvy person that she is, I think that we were able to kind of like create a safety net for ourselves before things got kind of sketchy for us even.
Yeah, totally.
Let's see. Next question. Caesar asks, how did you find that place and what made you decide to apply there?
Well, I'm going to keep it short because I know we're running really over, which was, I actually found it through kind of random searching, but I actually talk about it in my origin story, which where I saw it was on Backpage. Yeah.
I found it on Craigslist because I don't think I knew about Backpage, but I had just moved to New York from Texas, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I do believe that the internet is essentially a portal into whatever I can think of that I want. And so it was all the right words. Like, will train, no experience necessary, full fetish wardrobe provided. Those were all I needed. And I was like, okay, this is my way into whatever I'm going to try it out. I'm going to see.
Yeah. Should we choose one last one, just because I know there's a lot of questions, so we apologize, but we're like at an hour and 47 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is our time,
Yeah.
we can, do you have something to do?
I do. So.
Okay, cool. Then let's do one. Why don't you choose the last question?
I actually really like this one because I think it's really helpful, since we are talking about our Baby Domme years and newness. Any advice for new subs and clients? What's something someone new to kink should know? And any advice on how to first enter, feel out the scene? Thank you so much.
Great question. Yeah. So for new subs and clients, have an idea of what you would like to, how you would like to feel in your session with a pro dom. It doesn't have to necessarily be like, oh, I want a foot worship. I want you, but those things, of course, can be expressed. But it's, I think, also kind of helpful to find that sense of like, how do you want to feel in it, and that does take a little more thought. It does, but it does help immensely in the top creating a scene for you. And I think that like it's a collaboration, like you give them information and they create an experience for you based on the information that you give them. And if you don't know, like, what you would like to try. Like maybe you're not into butt stuff, maybe you're not a fetishist, but like what can you give them? Like the feeling is really, really helpful. And then any advice on how to first enter, feel out the scene? Um, I don't totally know how to answer that question. Maybe Lucy has a better idea.
So advice for new subs and clients. So I would say for anyone who is new to kink, and is just kind of exploring and discovering and trying to figure out, obviously, what they may be into, what you might be into. We are in this space of technology, and let it work for you. So I think a lot of people start off with watching some sort of porn, right? Because our kinks are part of our sexuality. Our, BDSM is part of sexuality. So the things that, like, intrigue you, get you turned on, make you like fantasize. And that usually starts with, for some of you, it starts with you've always just had some fantasy in your head and you really sometimes don't even know where it came from, but there's a fantasy that's played out, right? And so write that down, right? So if you've had a long held fantasy that you've had since your younger years, write that out and kind of see if there's some key elements in there, right? Or if you are watching porn, what porn are you gravitating towards, right? Again, you don't have to have porn is like the movies, right? That's not reality. It takes a lot of movie magic to make porn too. So, but it can pique your interest. It can tell you a lot about where your interests may lie, right? So a lot of your, for a lot of your interests, that it could be, you've been watching really extreme cuckolding porn, right? So you may not necessarily be ready to do a whole cuckolding scene, but you could play out a cuckolding role play, so write down what has been piquing your interest, write down your fantasies, write down what kind of porn you've been watching, and see if you can see some key things in there that you want to know more about it and explore. So that's a good way of like figuring out your own stuff. There are tons of lists out there that just list of activities, lists of kinks, lists of fetishes that you most probably can find and like, rate from 1 to 5 of how interested you are in them. There are a lot of those lists out there. So that's kind of a good way to like figure out your own stuff. In regard to like communicating it with somebody else, whether that's a partner or seeing a professional, those are a little different, right? Seeing a professional, we always say this: do your research, make sure that when you look for a professional, just like looking for any professional, like an electrician or a doctor, do your research, make sure that there's information about them. Most people are going to have websites, social media. There's going to be a lot of information if that person is legitimate. And go and look at those things and make sure that you know this person a little bit enough to say, hey, I want to see that,
Don't go just by looks.
Yeah, you can't just go by on looks, or don't go just by fees, right? Because if you go by just what's most affordable, which I get is common to think like that's what you want to do, you're going to pay for what you get for, you're going to get what you pay for. Like that's the reality sometimes. So be careful about that. So do your research. Someone legitimate is going to have a lot of information out there, and you'll be able to find it if you actually do your research. And I recommend a lot of newbies to actually see a professional, because you're going to get a lot of guidance around what you're looking for. And you're going to get a lot of tools about how to communicate what your interests are to somebody else. I find that if you are trying to explore with someone in your personal life for the first time, that can be really messy. It doesn't have to be, but like talking about sex in general has a lot of landmines in there. So sometimes that can be a little messy, because you might assume that they should be able to just read your thoughts. You might think that it's a, you know, that you guys will just figure it out. And sometimes it takes a lot more communication. And if you're not comfortable communicating clearly and effectively, then there's going to be a lot of like miscommunication. So sometimes it is see a professional, because they're going to be able to guide you through that experience a lot better. I definitely recommend that. But there's a lot of stuff out there for you to like, you know, to research, to help you with how to kind of approach this, and be gentle. You're not going to learn everything in one day, you know,
Have
be
patience.
gentle with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that this has been a really fun live broadcast. And thank you all so much for tuning in and asking questions, asking thoughtful questions, being very polite and supportive and encouraging. And if there are any questions that we were not able to get to, which I see a few, please consider subscribing to our Patreon. The address is patreon.com/La Maison de Rouge. And we would, we provide 30-minute video chats monthly, as well as a subtask. And the tiers just increase from there. So 30 minutes, 1 hour. And you'll get to ask all your questions. And, you know, somebody here wants to know how to get into the industry as a dominatrix. That's not really something that we can explain to you right here, but Lucy and I do offer mentorships, paid mentorships, as well as little tidbits of advice on Patreon. So please consider subscribing if you don't already. Thank you guys again. And I hope that you enjoyed our crazy ass stories.
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining, and till next time.
Goodbye.